So let me call up our first speaker, Lieutenant Sean Walker. He's the Operations Coordinator for the NYPD Behavioral Health Division. And Lieutenant Walker manages the department's protocols and response dealing with mental health issues and opioid and other dangerous drugs. One of the main initiatives is RxStat, which he'll explain about. It's a collaboration of over 35 city, state, and federal agencies who meet regularly at one Police Plaza to confront this crisis. Okay, please join me in welcoming Lieutenant Walker.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'd like to thank you for inviting me here tonight to speak to you about the opioid epidemic and how we at the NYPD are responding. My name is Sean Walker. I'm a lieutenant with the Chief of Department's office, the Behavioral Health Division. Our office is tasked with addressing several issues facing the city, including behavioral and mental health, the training and the response that the police department does, as well as homelessness and the opioid epidemic. The department has been working for many years to address all of these areas. I'll get into what we're doing specifically with the opioid epidemic in a few minutes. But first, I want to give you just a quick overview and some of the background on opioids and how it's driving the response that the department is taking today. All right, so what is an opioid? Opioids are narcotic substances. They can either be natural, coming from the opium poppy flower, semi-synthetic, or fully synthetic manufactured in the laboratory. They bind to opioid receptors in the brain and peripheral nervous system, and they block pain. While certain opioids can have medical benefits when prescribed and used properly in a short term, they can also be extremely dangerous and extremely addictive. In addition to relieving pain, they can cause a sense of euphoria or a high. And repeated use can cause a tolerance to develop over time, requiring larger and larger doses to achieve that same high. When too much of an opioid is taken, it can depress the respiratory system and cause respiratory failure, which can ultimately result in death. All right. So there's three general categories for opioids. Natural opioids come from the opium poppies, which include drugs such as opium, morphine, and codeine. Semi-synthetic opioids, while they do contain some of the natural compounds from the opium poppy flower, they also contain different amounts of other man-made compounds. And then synthetic opioids such as methadone, fentanyl, and carfentanil are completely man-made, manufactured in a laboratory. Most of the drugs named on the screen here you'll probably recognize. The majority of these drugs are considered Class II narcotics, which means they're regulated by the FDA and they have legitimate medical uses. But they also have a probability for misuse and can cause addiction. Then there are legal opioids, considered Class I narcotics, which have no medicinal use, such as heroin. So a little history about the opioid epidemic. From 1999 to 2017, more than 700,000 people in the United States have died from drug overdoses. Around 68% of the more than 70,000 drug overdose deaths in 2017 involved an opioid. In 2017, the number of overdose deaths involving opioids was 6 times higher than it was in 1999. On average, 130 Americans die every day from an opioid overdose. So this chart here may be a little difficult to see, but I'll explain it for you. It explains the three waves in the opioid epidemic as it stands now. The rise in opioid overdose deaths can be outlined here. First wave began with increased prescription of opioids in the 1990s, with overdose deaths involving prescription opioids, including natural and semi-synthetic opioids, and methadone increasing since at least 1999. The second wave began in 2010 with a rapid increase in overdose deaths involving heroin. The third wave began in 2013 with significant increases in overdose deaths involving synthetic opioids, particularly those involving the illicitly manufactured fentanyl. The illicit fentanyl market continues to change, and fentanyl can now be found regularly in combination with heroin, counterfeit pills, and cocaine. The numbers here in New York City have followed the national trends, with the largest increase in overdose deaths coming in the most recent years, with fentanyl-related cases driving the increase. And with steadily increasing overdose deaths in New York City since 2010, we actually saw the first recorded decrease in 2018, with 1,444 confirmed deaths occurring versus 1,482 in 2017. Now, there's always a delay in the year-end reporting for the investigations into causes of death, and they do take some time. So the Department of Health in New York City has not yet released the year-end numbers for 2019. We're expecting those in the next couple of weeks. But the first 2 quarters of 2019 are finalized, and New York City is roughly on the same path as 2018, with the numbers at the half-year mark coming in slightly below half of what they did in 2018. So we're remaining optimistic at this point that they will again see a drop in the next few months once the report is finalized, and we'll hopefully come out a little lower than we even did in 2018. But if we take a look at the July 1st, 2018 through the June 30th, 2019 map of the city, we can still see several areas where extremely high levels of fatal overdoses are occurring. As you can see here, there are still high levels of overdose deaths occurring in every borough, with the highest levels of overdose deaths occurring in the south and west side of the Bronx, Upper Manhattan, and the southern end of Staten Island. These numbers depicted here are a rate of overdose death per 100,000 residents. So we'll take just a few minutes to look at fentanyl and what makes fentanyl so deadly. Pharmaceutical fentanyl is a synthetic opioid pain reliever. It's manufactured in a laboratory. It's approved for treating severe pain, often used in advanced cancer cases. It's also commonly used as an anesthesia for surgery. What makes it so deadly is that when used illicitly or in combination with other drugs, it can be between 50 and 100 times more potent than morphine. It's often prescribed in the form of a transdermal patch or a lozenge for cancer patients. However, most recent cases of fentanyl-related overdose death are linked to illegally made fentanyl. It's sold through illegal drug markets for its heroin-like effects, and it's often mixed with heroin or cocaine as a combination product, either with or without the user's knowledge, to increase the euphoric effects. So most of the illegal fentanyl coming into the United States at this time comes from China. Now, for perspective, in 2017, a kilo of heroin averaged about $6,000 cost to a drug trafficking organization and could create a profit of around $80,000 on the street. The price of a kilo of fentanyl from an illegal drug market was on average a little over $4,000. On the street, when mixed or cut into other drugs like heroin or cocaine, the value could reach upwards of $1.6 million. The photo here is from a 2017 fentanyl seizure here in Queens. Multiple arrests were made at that scene. Now, if you do the conversion, 270 pounds of fentanyl, which was recovered there, is about 122.5 kilos. With a fatal dose of fentanyl being about 2 to 3 milligrams, the amount of fentanyl pictured in this slide here could have killed over 32 million people. And a scarier drug that we're now seeing on the streets is carfentanil. It's cut into heroin and cocaine. It's another synthetic opioid created in labs, and it's used in the veterinary world as a tranquilizer for large animals, such as elephants and horses. Carfentanil is 100 times stronger than fentanyl, which makes it 10,000 times stronger than morphine. It is so potent that most labs won't even test for it, because the slightest mishandling of the drug this strong can be deadly, even to the workers in the lab. I'm going to get into what the NYPD is doing regarding this epidemic in just a moment, but I want to show you one more comparison just for perspective. As of 2018, the estimated population in the United States, according to the Census Bureau, was over 327 million people. Now, according to the Center for Disease Control, as of that same year, over 48.5 million Americans used or tried illicit drugs or misused prescription drugs. That's just under 15% of the population. Now, just for perspective, in that same year, there were almost 226 million licensed drivers on the roads in the United States. This is just under 70% of the US population. So in 2018, 36,750 people were killed in motor vehicle collisions, and 68,500 people died from a fatal drug overdose. This is almost twice the number of vehicle deaths. So take a look at the timeline. Next slide. Take a look at this timeline, which is going to show in red for the corresponding year at the bottom, the states in which overdose deaths outnumbered vehicle collision deaths. As you can see, by 2016, only 12 states did not have overdose deaths outnumbering vehicle collision deaths. And we know that the number of overdose deaths increased again in 2017. But the good news here, as we saw in New York City, is that the provisional numbers for 2018 nationally also show a small decrease in overdose deaths from the previous year. So the hope is some of the work that we and other states and cities and organizations are doing is starting to take hold. So I'll talk a little bit about what the NYPD is doing in response to the opioid epidemic. And it's first important to remember that this is a public health crisis as well as a public safety one, and that no single agency can be successful in finding solutions to a problem of this magnitude without help. So one of our first steps was to create partnerships with other agencies in the New York City community who are also tackling this issue. Now, the NYPD has been partnering with other agencies for decades on various issues. But the main work on the opioid epidemic began with the RxStat working group that started in 2011. The RxStat initiative, now coordinated by HIDTA, which is the Federal High Intensity Drug Trafficking Areas Program through the Office of National Drug Control Policy, partnered the New York City law enforcement community with the New York City health community to accomplish several main goals: development and use of timely, accurate data, developing strategies based on the data collected, rapid deployment of public health and public safety resources, and deployment of resources specific to high priority areas. Now, for the first several years, RxStat was more of an information sharing platform between agencies to provide each other with up-to-date information, statistics, and recommendations for response. But as time went on and the opioid epidemic continued to worsen, it became clear that more operational and functional applications needed to come out of this initiative. Next. So the NYPD, in partnership with HIDTA and the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, created the RxStat Operations Group. This operational branch of RxStat held its first meeting in 2015, bringing together city, state, and federal agencies at one Police Plaza in the areas of law enforcement, health, and social services. The goal of the operational group is to prevent overdose mortality, which is done by looking at real fatal overdose cases, identifying gaps and missed points of intervention within those cases, and finding ways to work together to close these gaps and improve services. The RxStat Operations Group now has over 35 agencies as partner. Actually, as of this morning, it's now 37. We picked up another 2 today. And it continues to add new agencies as gaps and needs are identified. The group meets quarterly to debrief on selected cases, and during the months in between meetings, agencies work together to implement new policies, change operational deployments, and create partner agreements to address issues that were identified in previous case reviews. So I'll just provide you with a few examples of the types of partnerships and changes that have come out of this initiative. District Attorney's offices in Staten Island, the Bronx, Manhattan, and Brooklyn have partnered with community-based treatment organizations and the NYPD to create pre-arraignment diversion programs, allowing individuals arrested for low-level drug offenses to connect with treatment services immediately after arrest instead of going to court. Successful engagement with these programs results in no new drug charges from that arrest. New York City Medical Examiner has several new programs, including a drug intelligence and intervention group, who, with the assistance of staffing and funding from HIDA, provides referral and connection services to friends and families of individuals who have died of a drug overdose. HIDA has additionally funded epidemiologists and social workers at the medical examiner's office who conduct follow-up interviews with family and friends of overdose victims and assist in analyzing and sharing data with partner agencies to identify gaps in treatment and intervention and to prevent future overdose deaths. And the NYPD is working with HIDA, New York City and New York State Departments of Health, and the Regional Emergency Medical Services Council of New York City to map fatal and non-fatal overdose data in a new OD map program so that partner agencies can identify overdose clusters and patterns rapidly and respond to emerging conditions. New York City Department of Homeless Services secured funding and has distributed and trained over 15,000 homeless shelter residents and staff with naloxone kits. And now their shelter staff and security personnel carry naloxone daily. New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision implemented a medication-assisted treatment program for treating persons in their custody with drug addiction. MAT programs are widely regarded by the health community as effective and successful programs utilizing behavioral health therapy along with medications to treat addiction. Additionally, the New York City Health and Hospitals Correctional Health Service, who is already utilizing MATs in New York City jails, is working with state corrections to better transition individuals between city and state custody, and to distribute naloxone to visitors of the jails as well as individuals being released from incarceration. And within the NYPD, we've made numerous changes in our investigation and response to both fatal and non-fatal overdoses. In 2015, the NYPD outfitted and trained all of our patrol officers with naloxone kits through funding from the New York State Attorney General and the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Over the next 3 years, the department trained all remaining officers and switched from the generic naloxone to Narcan, the name brand naloxone spray, in a much easier to use and more durable administration device at a slightly higher dose. Currently, all officers are retrained with Narcan every 2 years, and all incoming recruit classes are trained each academy class. So far this year, and as of this morning's statistics, the NYPD has delivered naloxone to overdose victims 73 times since January 1st, successfully reversing 68 overdoses. If you're not familiar with Narcan or naloxone, this drug can reverse the effects of an opioid overdose within minutes and is administered by our officers as a nasal spray. Naloxone and Narcan block the opioid receptors in the brain and prevent opioids from attaching to the receptors. Now, naloxone only temporarily reverses the effects of an overdose, so it's critically important that an overdose victim receive further medical care following an overdose reversal, as they can re-overdose if the naloxone wears off before the opioid drug fully leaves their system. I'll give you some information on naloxone training and where you can get it at the end of the presentation for anybody who is interested. We've also engaged in public awareness campaigns to encourage people to call 911 when they witness or suffer an overdose themselves, without fear of arrest from the NYPD. This is covered under New York's Good Samaritan law, and is in response to fear of arrest when individuals or groups of people may be using opioids together, and when someone overdoses, we want anyone present to call for help without hesitation to save the life of the overdose victim. We, along with the Department of Health and City and State, have engaged in numerous public awareness campaigns. You may have seen similar messaging on billboards, trains, and on television over the past few years. We have only minutes to administer naloxone after an overdose occurs, so it's critical that help arrives as soon as possible. Over the past 10 years, the NYPD has also significantly changed the way we respond to overdose cases. First and foremost, we train all our officers to treat individuals who overdose as overdose victims. Our primary function is to respond with Narcan to save their life, get them medical treatment as quickly as possible, and connect the victim and their family and friends to services. Overdose victims are not the subject of criminal charges related to their overdose, or drug use, or drug possession. We do get them help. For a long time, overdoses, even fatal overdoses, were rarely investigated. Now, in all fatal overdose cases, and in non-fatal overdose cases where naloxone was administered, detectives and supervisors respond to every scene and to the hospital where the victim was taken. The primary purpose of this response is to first ensure that the victim and the family and friends present are connected to services, but it also helps us to gather information and safeguard evidence. Again, none of this is for criminal investigation against the overdose victim. But as the police, we do have a responsibility to protect the public, and we can do that in these cases in several ways. Quite often, an overdose victim will not even be aware that fentanyl was present in the substance they took. And we're finding it in more and more substances all the time. We're now testing any recovered drugs from fatal overdose scenes at our police laboratory, and often the drugs from non-fatal overdoses as well, for the presence of fentanyl and other dangerous synthetic substances. Now, through the partnerships we've created through RxStat, this has allowed us to have ways to share life-saving information with the health community and other law enforcement agencies on dangerous substances that we're encountering. So let's say, for example, we're encountering several fatal overdoses in a certain area where we recover what appears to be heroin with a certain stamp. Heroin is often stamped as sort of a brand name by dealers or distribution rings. Now these stamps get vouchered and they get tested for fentanyl and other substances by our police lab. The results of these tests are shared with the medical examiner and with the Department of Health at the city and state level, so they can focus their response on a specific geographic area and focus their public awareness campaigns to warn people of the presence of fentanyl related to the attached stamp. And of course, we still always conduct larger investigations into distribution networks and large-scale drug operations. We have close working partnerships with state and federal agencies and prosecutors, and we have special detective units now in each borough dedicated to investigating overdose, opioids, and heroin cases. We pay special attention to fentanyl, and we're working with prosecutors at the state and federal level to prosecute cases where those who knowingly distribute fentanyl-laced drugs have caused overdose deaths. Additionally, our neighborhood coordination officers have partnered with the Administration for Children's Services and Department of Health to distribute lock bags, lock boxes, and medication safety information since 2018. These containers help keep children safe from dangerous prescription medications that need to be kept in the home. Additionally, we have installed anonymous prescription drop-off boxes in numerous precincts around the city, and we'll be installing boxes at most remaining precincts this year. This is a safe and anonymous way to dispose of any medication you no longer want to have in your home. Also operating since 2016 is the NYPD's co-response team. This unit pairs police officers with clinicians from the New York City Department of Health who respond to and engage with individuals with known mental health, substance use, or co-occurring conditions with concerns about escalating risk factors exist. This unit operates 7 days a week citywide, and there's a triage desk which takes referrals from NYPD commands, New York City Well, and other resources 24/7. Teams are available to immediately respond to persons in crisis and connect them with mental health and substance use services, including transportation to hospitals, shelters, and drop-in centers as needed. Clinicians are able to immediately access Department of Health history information for clients and can use this information to guide response and ensure appropriate services are connected. The department has also partnered with the Department of Health and the Thrive Initiative to create and open 2 support and connection centers as alternatives to hospital emergency rooms or jails to bring nonviolent individuals with behavioral health or substance use needs. The first center in Harlem opened in February of this year, and is available to intake clients 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The center can house clients for short-term stay and can provide numerous medical, mental health, and substance use treatment options on site, as well as referrals and follow-up care around the clock. The second center will be opening later this year in the 4-7 precinct in the north end of the Bronx. In 2019, the department also began deploying nurses with police officers to respond to the city's homeless populations. These mobile crisis teams, in partnership with the New York City Police Department, the Department of Health, and the Department of Homeless Services, engage with homeless individuals and provide treatment in connection to services, hospitals, and shelters. Similar to the co-response teams, mobile crisis engages with individuals with known mental health and substance use issues and offers medical, psychiatric, and substance abuse services 7 days a week. We will be expanding the co-response teams to soon respond to 911 calls for behavioral health emergencies in pilot precincts, and continue to engage new partners to provide more resources throughout the city. We have now trained almost all of our officers in a 4-day crisis intervention team training program, familiarizing them with behavioral health and co-occurring substance use disorders, and giving them the tools to better respond to persons in crisis. We continue to close gaps identified through the RxStat initiative and find new and better ways to share information and respond to overdoses. We're working with prosecutors to expand pre-arraignment diversion programs to offer treatment instead of incarceration for low-level drug offenses. And we're working with our partners to make Narcan and naloxone more available throughout the city. Our hope is that with continued partnership, community engagement, and expansion of services, we'll be able to see a steady decrease in overdose deaths. But the drug market is expanding, more dangerous substances are always becoming available, and better access to services, treatment, and care are severely needed. So I hope this has given you some insight into the opioid epidemic and how we are responding. I want to leave you with a little information on obtaining naloxone and Narcan and other substance abuse resources available here in the city. Naloxone is now available at most retail pharmacies in New York City for purchase without a prescription, and some insurance companies even cover the cost. Free training and distribution programs can also be found on the links on the page here. And there are upcoming free naloxone training and distribution sessions at the Department of Health here in Queens. More local-based community free resources are also available on the link on the screen there. You can also request that the Department of Health come and conduct a naloxone training at one of your future meetings, and they can be contacted also through the link if you'd like to do so. I'm happy to stay and answer questions after the presentations. I appreciate all your time. Stay safe.